wow, I'm really lucky that the world has changed enough that I don't have to focus on like being a woman in a man's world. I can like just be a human in a human's world.
I never really thought of myself as a woman captain. And Clearwater was certainly a good environment where it wasn't particularly pointed out to you what you were or weren't.
Oh, that's so cool, you're a woman captain. And it was like, you don't want to have any reaction, really. You don't want to be a woman captain, you just want to be a captain.
Hi. I'm happy to see everyone here in this webinar. I see over 100 people have joined us already, so thank you for coming. Thank you for joining us for this special edition of She Sailor Sea Stories. If you don't know me, my name is Amali Knobloch, and I serve on the board of the National Women's Sailing Foundation. Tonight is extra special for me because I'm also the Outreach and Engagement Manager at the Hudson River Sloop Clearwater, the organization whose legacy inspired me to bring this event to life. So I wanted to take this opportunity to thank Debbie Huntsman, the president of the board of the National Women's Sailing Association, for allowing me to take up not one, but 2 nights of programming to toot the Clearwater horn. Clearwater is an organization, if you don't know, that launched in 1969 as a beacon of the Hudson Valley and was created to raise awareness about the environmental conditions of the river that we sail on. Since then, through 50 years of public programming, almost 500,000 people have crossed the deck of the sloop, many of whom's first direct interaction with the river took place on board with the captains and the crew. So tonight, in honor of Women's History Month, we're going to celebrate the legacy of 3 of those captains, Kate Cronin, Betsy Garthwaite, and Cindy Smith. There is something really special about the Clearwater community that has a storied past of female or female presenting leadership from on board the sloop all the way up to the board. Knowing how tough it can be a woman aboard any boat, let alone a tall ship, we thought it was important to share the stories of women who belonged and led this community, free from many of those negative experiences or disappointing behaviors that many of us experience on board all different kinds of boats today. Our first speaker, we're going in chronological order, is going to be Kate Cronin, who was the first female captain aboard the sloop Clearwater in 1980, the torch was handed to her by Peter Wilcox. We're really, really excited to hear from her. And Kate, take it away.
Thanks, Molly. And good evening, everyone. Great to be here. It's a great honor to be invited. It was a terrifying moment, and I've had terrifying moments as captain of Clearwater. Unexpected jibe, broken prop shaft in New York Harbor, docking in 7-knot currents with no engine. Those moments were resolved one way or another with decisive action and quick work of a talented crew and support from the Clearwater community. And these are stories for another time. This was different and was a terrifying moment I've not shared with many. My sailing story starts when I was a young teen in Maine. I was practically falling into the huge stew pot that I was scrubbing my first day on the dish crew of the lobster restaurant on the Maine coast that summer. Ellen, also an underage dish crew buddy, pulled me out of that stew pot and pointed to the window. "You've got to see this. One of the big schooners is sailing close by." My family didn't sail, nor did we live anywhere near the coast. But for summer jobs, we headed to the coastal tourist areas for work. Ellen had local family who knew one of the owner captains of a couple old and repurposed cargo schooners now carrying passengers on week-long vacations. "You know, we could get paid just as little doing dishes on a schooner and have a lot more fun," she says. Ha, what a great idea. Though inexperienced and a few years too young, I started writing letters to a dozen captains, and in the meantime, got pretty fast at washing dishes before I landed on the deck, actually below decks, in the galley on one of the main schooners. After 2 summers as a galley girl, I learned pure admiration for the women who cook in difficult small spaces for hungry crowds, respect for the dangers, the heavy moving objects, the booms, the gaffs, the huge sails, and always considering the safety of everyone. I learned to get my work done, get on deck, watch the crew, and be ready to haul a line or furl a sail, or do anything. Now, with no women role models as deck crew or captains, I knew I would have to find my own way. And I would use my galley skills as a launching pad. Now, going with the flow suited my personality more than trying to change it. Yet it planted the seed that change could happen. When I heard about the Clearwater in New York that still sailed after the main schooner season ended, I wrote another letter. Captain Peter Wilcox actually wrote back. He needed a relief cook for a month, the fall of 1976. Like many before and after me, I stretched that month to 6. It was a thrilling moment to be welcomed aboard by the first woman I'd ever seen as deck crew. Also, she wanted me to help her. Second mate Carol showed me how to handle lines, take the tiller, and so much more. I watched her closely, my first role model, quiet, capable, kind. As the new cook, I tossed together meals, but sometimes ignored the importance of the cook's role in the care and feeding of the crew. The following spring, as the whole crew worked day and night against the clock to get rigged and ready for the season, I was out at the tip of the bowsprit, hanking on the jib with Carol, when I hear, "Hey, Cronin, where's lunch?" I yell back, "Peanut butter and jelly for all in the galley." Captain Wilcox had other things in mind. Louder, "Cronin." Me, "Okay." I had found a unique community and was gaining new skills, was passionate about Clearwater's environmental causes, the pumpkin sail concerts, spontaneous evening music jams, or sailing through the quiet of the night drew me in. But soon I was off to Maine, then the Caribbean, to work on other traditional boats. The terrifying moment I referred to earlier is what brought me back to the Clearwater 3 years after I'd left. Actually, it was the 10-word telegram from Captain Peter Wilcox. "Cronin, heard you have 100-ton license. Stop. Leaving Clearwater, job yours. Stop. Start April. Stop." I was terrified. Peter believed I could do something I didn't know I could. I agreed. And Peter agreed to stay for a while and mentor me in every aspect of being Clearwater's captain. Well, almost. Navigating the often tricky waters of media attention as the first woman captain of Clearwater, I had to do it on my own. We didn't talk much about mentoring, just built it into the routine. Wilcox below decks doing paperwork while I handled the school programs, then on deck coaching me during the nighttime sails and the tricky dockings. We also didn't talk about exactly when it was time for me to go solo. But let's call it a leap of faith. The day Wilcox unilaterally decided it was time, but forgot to tell me, was a memorable moment that I'll share, just in case anyone else wants to know how to pull it off. On a late spring day, when I'm trying to rendezvous with the sloop after a few days off, the Clearwater gets underway from a town along the Hudson's west shore for a school program with 50 kids on board. I'm waiting at a wharf on the opposite shore to be picked up. As I watch the Clearwater sailing along in a light breeze, it becomes clear they'll just sail by and I'll need to jump. Just as first mate Patrick carefully closes the gap between the sloop and the wharf. Wilcox is hanging over the stern, reaching out a hand to help me get aboard. With my duffel in hand, as I'm making that leap, Wilcox, with his duffel in hand, leaps off. It's all yours, Cronin. Good luck. This might have been a terrifying moment. My first time as solo captain. It wasn't. I now knew that what Wilcox had known when he sent the telegram. I'd do okay with a lot of support. Thank you to all the Clearwater crews and community for giving me a chance and guiding me along the way. I've tried to pay it forward by doing the same for the women and men who sailed with me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a very beautiful story. I'm like already verklempt. I'm really, really happy that you were here with us, and the rest of the ladies are here to share their stories. I mean, you know, it's not long that we all get to be together and to be able to learn from each other, and that's what this forum is all about. So thank you, Kate.
Thank you.
No problem. Our next speaker is Betsy Garthwaite, who many of you may know, who was the captain of the Clearwater from 1992 to 1996. Many of you may also know her as the board president for a period of time, and really has been critical in helping get this event together, who has maintained a log of all of the captains, not just the female captains, and keeping them together, keeping their contact information up to date, and making sure that that community stays knit. So thank you, Betsy, for joining us.
Thank you, Molly, so much. And, you know, when I was invited to participate in, and also I want to just thank everyone who's attending and welcome them all tonight, because I know I do know many of you. But when I was invited to participate in this evening's storytelling event, I thought to myself, well, you know, how does anyone distill, you know, 4 years as captain of the sloop Clearwater, plus all of the years I spent on the crew before that, you know, into just a few minutes? And I thought about it, and I remembered 2 sails I did as captain that were just standouts for me. And that's what I wanted to share this evening, because I believe that when the river and the sloop and people come together, sometimes we can create magic. And this is a photograph of me dressed up as my superhero alter ego, Captain Midnight. And this is actually a photo taken during Pumpkin Sail at the Piermont Pier. And Captain Midnight knew a thing or two about magic. So I remember this one sail out of Liberty State Park, Jersey City, New Jersey, on a rather breezy day. It was 1994, I think, and we were taking out a group of 4th or 5th graders, the typical age for a Clearwater educational sail. And they were from a nearby school. They were inner city kids, what we used to call disadvantaged, you know, mostly kids of color. And the sloop's educator had gone ashore to greet the group, which is the usual, you know, the usual way, and then divide them into 5 smaller groups that were each assigned to a volunteer crew member. And then one by one, the students, the teachers, other adult chaperones, and the crew members boarded the vessel, except for this one boy who was refusing to come out with us. And I could see his teacher pleading with him and then losing her patience, because she's saying, you know, you're holding up the whole group. And if you don't come out and you stay behind, you're going to have to wait for 3 hours on the school bus. And one of the teachers is going to have to stay behind with you. And it was very obvious to me that her tactics were not working, and that this kid was legitimately very scared. He had probably never been on a boat before in his life, he had, let alone a sailboat. And he you know, probably didn't know how to swim. That was my guess. And I said, look, can I talk to him? And he said, yes. So I said to this kid, I said, you know, in all the time I've been captain of this vessel, I have never lost anyone overboard, and I am not planning on doing that today. But I understand that you're anxious about this experience, and if it would make you feel safer, then we can put you in a life jacket. Would you be willing to try that? And by some miracle, he said, okay. And like I said, it was a breezy morning. I had already instructed the crew to tuck in one reef, and I was waffling about a second. And this is a photo taken several years earlier on a day in May of 1986 when you were Captain, Kate, of the sloop sailing in New York Harbor with a single reef tucked in. There's some other notable things about this photograph, but I won't take the time this evening. But, you know, I was sure that this kid wasn't the only kid who was nervous. You know, he wasn't the only kid who had never been on a boat before, who was afraid, who didn't know how to swim. And yet, you know, with a group of nervous kids, you don't want to heel over too far because that will just make them more nervous. But if you shorten sail too much, then the sloop's not going to be able to get anywhere without using the engine. And then those kids are going to go through the rest of their lives thinking that sailboats are like incredibly boring. And so was their entire Clearwater experience. And I decided to stick with a single reef. So we got off the dock and motored out of the channel, which brings you past the backside of Lady Liberty. And I always remember this vantage point of the statue, which is not what you see if you're taking the Staten Island ferry, because her enormous, the heel of her enormous right foot, as you can see, is lifted up off the ground, which gives her this sense of movement, like she's walking, moving forward, leading the way with her torch held high. And we motor across the harbor and to the anchorage off of Brooklyn, a spot known as Bay Ridge Flats, to set our trawl net. And we trawl for about 4 or 5 minutes to collect a sampling of fish that we will use later in the program for educational purposes. And then with all of the students helping, we raise the sail. So this next photo is of is not from that day. It's just a generic photo of kids raising sail, like a whole bunch of them, maybe 20 on one halyard. It turned out that day that the amount of sail I had up for the amount of wind was just absolutely perfect. We were like moving really nicely through the water, but what was even just as perfect was that we had my favorite conditions for a Clearwater sail. We had, you know, the wind was opposing the direction of the tidal current. So no matter what point of sail I was sailing at, you know, close hauled, downwind, I could make way across the bottom. I could actually get somewhere. And that kid, I can't say for sure, but I'm pretty sure I remember that he had his life jacket off before the sail was even over. He had a good time. And I think most of those kids had a good time. And this is another photo, which is not from that day. But I love this photo because you look at those faces and you see how invested those kids are in what they're doing and how important they must feel doing that, steering this big ship. And that is magic. That is just magic. But whatever happened to that boy, I'll probably never know unless I meet him one day and we figure out that we have this shared experience. But I like to think that he came away with, you know, positive memories of his experience that day, and that he learned something about fear, and that we don't always overcome our fears. I don't think we do, but we learn how to not let them get in our way. The second half of my story involves someone with no fear of the river. And this is, this is a sail. I'm pretty sure I remember we were transiting from Garrison to Beacon with members of the Brooklyn Sloop Club, which was one of Clearwater's charter clubs. And if you don't know the Hudson River, Garrison is located across the river from the United States Military Academy at West Point, and it's a portion of the river, section of the river known as the Hudson Highlands, where a glacier carved through the Appalachian mountain chain during the last ice age. It's a very tricky place to sail because the winds are fluky because of the hills, but it's incredibly beautiful. And the Brooklyn Sloop Club, this is a photo taken of the sloop in the Highlands. The Brooklyn Sloop Club was on board for their annual sail, and they came with lots of food to share. Somebody from that group, I remember, brought Chinese pork buns every year. I remember the box of Chinese pork buns. Anyway, we were having a pretty good time. And when we sailed north past Storm King Mountain, which is the northern terminus of the Hudson Highlands, I could see there were a couple of windsurfers skidding across the water at the southern edge of Newburgh Bay. Now, some windsurfers will make you nervous because they're inexperienced, and inexperienced windsurfers fall a lot. The last thing you want is for a windsurfer to fall when they're crossing your bow, because that will give you a heart attack. But there were two spots on the river where I knew I could count on very skilled windsurfers. And these windsurfers, they would come out even if it was blowing 25 knots or more. And one spot was Kingston Point. And this is a photo of a windsurfer off of Kingston. And you can see from the water that the wind's probably blowing pretty good there. The other spot I could find skilled windsurfers was the lower end of Newburgh Bay. And this is a shot taken from the Clearwater, looking south from Newburgh Bay towards the Highlands. That's Storm King Mountain on the right. So these two windsurfers that I had spotted, they didn't concern me at all. And at a certain point, the one guy crossed so close past our stern that we literally probably could have reached out and handed him one of those delicious pork buns. And he called out to us with words that I will remember for the rest of my life. He said, "Clearwater, it's thanks to you that we're out here." And I was like, wow. All of the hard work, all of the heavy lifting, all of the millions of dollars that the Clearwater organization and its thousands of members had invested in educating and inspiring people and in cleaning up the Hudson River from 1965, when the sloop was just a twinkle in Pete Seeger's eye, up until that moment, almost 30 years later, had been just summed up in a single sentence. It's thanks to you that we're out here. The river wasn't an open sewer any longer, and this is another image of Newburgh Bay. This is taken from the Newburgh waterfront, looking across the river to Beacon. And this photograph was taken in April of 1970, and the sloop has just departed Beacon and is headed to Washington, D.C. to lobby for the Clean Water Act. So the river is no longer this open sewer now when we're out there on the bay with the windsurfer. It's a beautiful place where you could go windsurfing, and if you fell, you weren't afraid of getting wet. So the river works its magic, and that's my point. And it's not stingy with its rewards. It has certainly worked its magic on me, because I think it changes the way you listen and what you listen to. And it demands that you pay attention to the wind and tides. But most importantly, I think it changes the way you view the world. Because just like the statue looks very different from behind. The world looks very different from the surface of the river than it does from the river bank or from the top of a mountain miles away. It makes you think differently. It makes you ask different questions. It makes you set different priorities and make different choices, and not just for yourself, but for other people and other living things as well. And that's what I mean when I talk about river magic. So I wouldn't trade my time sailing aboard Clearwater for anything in this world, because yes, that is the Hudson River. That is the west side of Manhattan. And those are the flukes of a humpback whale. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Betsy. It really speaks to, I think, my experience on board, feeling like, you know, people don't really get it until they get it. You know, they don't get it until they're on board in the middle of the river looking at New York City or looking at the Highlands. And that is the moment, which is why our, you know, our ed program is so rewarding, that people are really enwrapped with the world that is around them. And I think that's that moment, that Hudson River magic, where they think about the environment that they're in a different way than they have, you know, maybe their whole lives. Well, thank you for sharing that. That was wonderful. Our next and final speaker is Cindy Smith. She was the captain from 1994 to 1999, and is really going to share a little bit more about the strength and the wonderfulness of the Clearwater community. Our interview with her when we first began this process was one of the most enlightening ones. She had many, many stories to tell us that really helped us hone in on what we wanted this webinar to look like. So we're really excited to hear from Cindy.
Hi, everybody. And I just can't even tell you how happy it makes me to see all of you on this Zoom call tonight, and to see so many friends in the room. I'll start with talking a little bit about my first impressions, my very first season on the Clearwater. Some of you know I came down from Bar Harbor. I'd been working a tourist schooner up there. The captain at that tourist schooner actually liked having women on his crew because they worked longer and harder and were more careful about what they were doing. But I was really bored with the tourist world. I had recently graduated from Middlebury with so I thought I was going to be a high school science teacher. And so the fact that there was this boat where I could do education and sailing was like the most amazing thing ever. The other way I got there was I had been a student on sea semester on a boat called the Westward with Beth Doxey was the third mate. And she talked about this boat. And Albert Shahinian was also on the crew that summer when I was a student. And so I found Clearwater through them. Now, Betsy and I have talked a little about this, how young we were. Yes, I got to Clearwater, I was 21. It was September of 1988. And I met the boat at South Street Seaport. I'd never been on a subway before and never been down to the seaport. And I eventually found my way there. But what I really remember right from the beginning was what an amazing community of people were on Clearwater. There's a picture, and I don't know if Meg has it or not, but of 4 of us sitting on the pier at Pier 15 with most people are wearing Soviet American t-shirts, Soviet American sail. And I'd never heard of people doing things like the Soviet American sail. I'd never heard of people willing to like really stand up for what they believed in and taking these huge political actions. My first season on the boat, Nadine Block was the first mate. I learned about Greenpeace. I learned about people rappelling off of the Brooklyn Bridge, where they were stopping the sludge barges from going out through the East River. So the activism on Clearwater was a really new, eye-opening experience for me. Let's see, what else my first season? I came on board as a Maid of the Month. There it is, Sober American Sale, with Betsy and me and Joya and Lois and Becca. And I'm sorry, I don't remember the last person's name. But I think it's great that Betsy and that person are wearing the same color pants. Okay. Anyway, I digress as always. So one of the most amazing things that happened my first season, again, was my first couple weeks, and it's not really my story to tell because I wasn't the captain, but it's going to blend in with this whole concept of community and working together. So I think Beth was in her first season as captain, and we had just started doing an ed sail off of Hastings on Hudson. Now, we didn't go to Hastings for very long. It was a pretty rundown area. And like so many docks along the Hudson at that time, they were either soon to be rebuilt or not. And so they stopped letting kids go across them. But anyway, so we're easing away from the dock, the engine on, just like we always did. And I happened to glance aft and look at the captain, and Beth's got this look on her face, and I hear the engine revving because, she's got to kick the stern out from the dock, but the stern's not kicking. So we're like, huh. And I was just a deckhand, right? I was the Maid of the Month, so I just sort of stayed out of the way, and lots of running up and down as this engineer named Blix, I didn't even know her, was like running down below one hatch and then up and over the deck and down into the main cabin. And she came back up from the main cabin and sort of shrugged and shook her head like, everything's fine. So Beth called for the anchor to set the anchor, and whatever crew was on the foredeck did that. And we swung around to the tide, and everything was fine on the boat. We did our education sail there at anchor. And the next thing I remember was that I got to be one of the people to row the kids ashore, because we really had actually lost the propeller. The propeller shaft had broken. The propeller was not there. Talked to Joya about how she had to dive on it however many times. And the guys up in the office who didn't believe her that it wasn't there. What was most amazing about this, I got to row the kids ashore after the ed program, so that they had their ed program, they got to go to shore. I felt really good about that because I knew how to row. It didn't occur to me that everybody didn't know how to row. And I was able to be helpful in this crazy situation. So another memory I have of that was that we were getting towed up the river in the dark by this guy on a little boat. It looked kind of like a little lobster boat or something. And we were kind of yawing back and forth widely from one side to the other. And I remember people were very alarmed because we were approaching the Tappan Zee Bridge, and it was pretty hard to know exactly how we were going to get through that span, but it all went fine. There's a picture of Captain Al Nejma and John Mylod standing in chest waders with the water, I swear, just an inch below the top of their waders. We're aground in Croton Bay, and they're putting the new shaft and the new propeller into the boat while we're still in the water, but aground. I don't remember that we had a lot of downtime, and we were back sailing again really fast. Like, how could these people just manage to do whatever it is that had to be done to keep this boat sailing. We didn't miss sails. We didn't want to disappoint the kids. There was no way they were going to be able to reschedule. It was the most amazing amount of teamwork, and I saw it a million times, and a million. Whether it was pumpkin sail or it was an ed sail, just everybody working together to get everything done, whatever needed to be done. So that was my first season. We lost the prop. At the very end of that first season, I had missed most of the Greenport, of the Greenport shipyard that year, but I got to be on board to help bring the boat up to Saugerties. And I was the little eager beaver with her binoculars on bow watch who spotted something in the water and told Beth, I don't think that's a log. And no, it was not a log. And we had to circle around in Kingston Bay for hours until the sheriff or the Coast Guard or somebody got there to collect the poor person who had chose to end their life by jumping off the Kingston Bridge. So that was my first year on Clearwater. All right, Nadine Block was first mate. Betsy was second mate. Joy and I were talking this. I think we had Laura Snyder as third mate. Kelly Klein was bosun. Joya was engineer. And Caroline Van Schaik, I think, was the cook. So it was an all-female crew when Beth was on, and well, that was pretty cool. It didn't really occur to me that that it was an all-women crew, but I guess it really was. And Al Nejma was the other captain, and Brian and Travis were the educators. So we always had one of the guys on board, but it was still one of the most amazing seasons ever. And that's how I got started at Clearwater. Now, many of you know I came back for years later. One of the other points I wanted to make here was the incredible generosity of the people in the Clearwater community. I remember I was hired as engineer. What did I know about engineering? Well, I knew Joya, but then there was this crazy volunteer, Pietro. Now, I never could figure out why he was called Pietro, but he was called Pietro, and he taught me everything about how to take care of the boat and the engine from the engineering side of things. And he was so much fun to be around, and so much, just such incredible patience. In those days, and I understand you guys have a regular generator now, and I don't know what that means compared to what we had, which was the Lister with a generator. We had to have shore power most of the time because we only had lights on the boat for 12 volt, and then we needed the batteries all to be charged up to be able to run the boat. So, I learned all about electricity and 12 volt and things I probably should never have known, like how to wire into a street lamp to make sure we had shore power. And again, the generosity of the Clearwater community, whether it was volunteers or crew or deckhands, educators, was just amazing to contribute every year, and they kept coming back. I remember a volunteer named Gail David. She was a teacher from PS something or other, and she was a great volunteer. Now, I did teach high school for 3 years, and I know how hard it is to be a teacher. And the fact that she would that all of these people from wherever their lives were would give up a week of vacation to come volunteer on the boat to live, in a shoebox with 17 other people, to help do the Clearwater work was just an amazing thing. Was really just an amazing thing. And so I really so fondly remember all my time on Clearwater and the incredible experience. Now, another time of incredible generosity was the year that Betsy was captaining by herself. And she had this endless run of relief captains coming through. And these are the people who taught me how to be a captain. They taught me how to dock the boat. That would be Mike Cohen and Don Taub and Kevin Jones and Amy Blumberg and Dan Moreland, and I don't know who I'm forgetting, but forgive me for if I forget to mention you. But I loved the fact that they would let me dock, and I learned how to dock, and I think I learned to do it pretty well. It got to be kind of a fun thing. How close to 12 o'clock can you hit the dock for the end of the Ed sail? And it was really that fall season of 94 when I came back. I was working as first mate under Betsy and the endless run of relief captains. And that I said, okay, I'm ready to take on this responsibility. So, Kate, I didn't have that absolutely terrifying experience that you did. And I can't even imagine having to be thrust into it before I was ready. But Amy Blumberg did tell me one time, she said, geez, I had no idea being a captain was so much work on this boat. You did everything. But really, Clearwater has the most amazing community, and it's the most amazing river, the most amazing boat, and it's incredibly rare. I have never in my life since Clearwater, and I started on Clearwater 33 years ago, and I've been gone since 99. For those of you who don't know, I live in Maine on the Androscoggin, but I have never found a community like I found on Clearwater. I have never found the generosity of spirit and community and teaching mentorship anywhere else. And so for all of us who have experienced it, I just want you all to know that I treasure it. I treasure all of you. I'm so thrilled to see 125 people on this. Names I all remember. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember them. I remember them. I remember them. So thank you all for being a part of one of the most important experiences of my life. Yes, the time Walter Cronkite came on the boat was another huge event. And I loved that. I was very lucky. I think that day it was about 98 degrees out and there was not a breath of wind. It was so hot. But Walter was a great guest to have on board. I'll stop rambling now. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Cindy. It's really important to, hear all of those different stories about all of the different times where people have come together and shared a crazy experience of something happening on board and then the community rallying to make it work. I think that's still very, very much true of the community today. I'm going to move on to a couple of questions. If you all are down to hang out, we can keep going a little bit later. There's one wonderful one that I would really love to start with that starts with a compliment. For all the captains, first, as a fellow river rat, you have always had and still have my great admiration. And second, many of the first kids to sail on Clearwater are in their 60s now. Can you reflect on this extraordinary legacy and what comes to mind today? And we can start with Kate, if you have a response to that one.
I love the idea that there's a many, sort of flowing through the generations. And and I've heard from people who will say, I crewed when you were captain and you made an impression on me, or something we were doing, or the fact that the crew were so creative about how to engage all the students was so memorable and felt so welcoming. So it never felt that it was anything that we were seeking to do to inspire the next generation of mariners, but I think we have, maybe collectively, I'm sure Betsy and Cindy and others have heard from people who said, I went into environmental work, or as I grew up, I decided I wanted to be on the water and I found ways to do that. So anyway, I think it's, yes, Cindy gave her years. I think for me, it was 40 years ago that 41 years ago, I became captain. And so there are people who have encountered Clearwater in a formative time of their life as the students on board of one type or another and have moved on. And it gives me a lot of great pleasure to know that we were part of helping them do that.
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, we have about 10,000 people a year that cross the deck. So it's easy to imagine all of the people that you've impacted, and then, their family and friends who they tell about the organization and their experience on board, and that ripple effect that makes Clearwater so amazing. The next question, I'll shoot to Betsy. What did you learn from Clearwater that you took with you beyond the community or outside of the community?
Okay, so sorry, my video was off. I think I took many things away from the Clearwater, and part of it was just like I said during my sharing, was just a different way of thinking about things. But one of the things that, because I always will, for the rest of my life, whether I'm on the water or I'm living in Kansas, I will consider myself a sailor, and I will think like a sailor. And one of the ways a sailor thinks is to think 3 steps ahead, because it's so easy on a boat to get yourself in a situation you can't get out of. So it's almost like a chess game. You have to be prepared. You have to be looking steps ahead. It's also the way that, the outside world is so important to me. I don't understand why we want to colonize Mars when living on Mars would be like being in a COVID lockdown for the rest of your life because you can't go outside without putting on a spacesuit. We need to fix the planet we live on, and but other things, just like about cooperation, there weren't many things I think you could do on the Clearwater without getting physical help from another person. You had to say, could you please help me move the gangway? Because somebody had to take one end and somebody had to take the other. You didn't raise the sail by yourself, certainly. So those are just some of the things that there are lessons about life that I wish everyone could learn. Because I don't think that, Clearwater does this amazing job at presenting this great 3-hour program to typically the age range is 4th or 5th or 6th grade. But I think some of the people that have been been impacted by Clearwater are the people that have come on board for a week as a volunteer and really had a more immersive experience, or those of us who actually worked on board for weeks or months or even years at a time. So like it's all over the place, but it was a lot. It was a lot. I know that I carry it with me every single day, for sure.
And then the last question I'll open up to anyone who wants to answer it, because I think this speaks a little bit to why we're here. The Clearwater community being one that is so strong, I think part of the reason why people keep coming back is because it's a welcoming community, and it's a place where you can feel comfortable and hang out with friends and people who grow into being your family while doing this really extremely fulfilling work. And so there's a question in the Q&A that asked about other vessels once you had left Clearwater. Did you find the welcoming environment for female crew members and captains that we found at Clearwater at any other organizations? And if not, were you able to change any of the perceptions at any of the other boats that you worked on or hiring practices there after your experience here at Clearwater?
Well, I'll go ahead and just start, I guess. So there's a lot of what I call cross-pollination between certain organizations because they have like missions. And, I think, primarily through Kate, I got involved with the Hurricane Island Outward Bound School in Maine. And there was certainly a lot of strong female role models there working in the sailing program. So that was also a welcoming environment. It was different from Clearwater, but it was welcoming. Some other vessels, one of the things, the Clearwater captain that came after Kate was Peg Brandon, and she was the first female captain to be hired by the Sea Education Association when she took command of the schooner Westward. So by the time that I landed on the schooner Westward, or not, I was on a different SEA vessel, the Corwith Kramer, as third mate a year later. It was again, there wasn't any kind of, roadblocks, I felt like, in that organization. But I personally invested most of my sailing time at Clearwater because I just really was so in love with the boat and the river and the Clearwater community itself. And I think while other organizations like, especially maybe Sound Experience, that former Clearwater Captain Morley Horder founded on the Puget Sound out in Washington State, there was a lot of cross-pollination there between the two organizations, and certainly that would have been an organization that was welcoming to women. There's something about the Clearwater, organization and community that is completely unique. And I have to say that that's just because I think of Pete. I think it's Pete. I really do. And I can't say just Pete because I never want to give Pete credit without saying Pete and Toshi.
Mm-hmm. Molly, I think I want to just say, Betsy's really made all these points, is that during the time after I was done being the captain, and Peg and Greg were both on, that's when some, Morley Horder, who wanted to learn what Clearwater was doing, he came out and served in a role as sort of a quasi, relief captain, and I was there overlapping with him. He came specifically to learn what it was about the Clearwater that was welcoming, that was a great solid education program that was being emulated around the world in lots of different ways, and then bring that back. So I think that because we were creative, like Betsy mentioned, making space for someone to come and serve in some kind of capacity to learn and take away what it was that Clearwater had to offer them, and then they would go back to where they were committed to trying to change and create new programs. And that happened in, I can't list the places right now, but people came from Europe focus on their river qualities and learned about the Clearwater program, went back and started creating programs on their own. So I love being able to say that we were certainly a rich place to foster that kind of sense and a sense of community.
I wanted to just address something that Betsy just reminded me of, which was that, we wouldn't be here without Pete and Toshi. And we all have recognized the power that music has had and its influence in our lives and its ability to, create something like the Clearwater, which we wouldn't necessarily, have a direct line to with music, but is part of the reason why we're here. And so one of the wonderful and amazing things that we did in celebration of this event was create a playlist. All of our captains have contributed and are going to continue to tribute into next week with our next 3 speakers about of songs that reminded them of their time on board. Bridget, who is our chat moderator, is going to drop that link in the chat. There it is. So you can listen to what it sounded like when Kate was the captain, when Cindy was the captain, when Betsy was the captain, when Sam was the captain, who's going to speak next week, when Joya was the captain, and Amy Nelson, our next 3 speakers. So I will end on that note. Thank you so much. I'm really, really happy that we did this. It was really wonderful to hear from all 3 of you and to see the family in the chat reconnecting with each other. And we'll see you all next week. Thank you so much.